Now, my personal tips when preparing for Amazon interviews. Hello everyone, welcome to Career School. I've been covering a lot of content related to Amazon, including leadership principles, interview tips, and many more. However, I noticed that I haven't shared my experience preparing for Amazon interviews. I thought this was a great time to share this, as I have recently gone through multiple loop interviews within many internal teams as I was preparing for a job rotation within the company. So in this video, I'll share how I prepare for an Amazon interview and also share my cheat sheet that I use for all the interviews. Let's dive in. As I usually do, I'm going to break down the whole process into several steps. Number 1, understand the job you're applying for. Every process in interview prepping or looking for a new role should start with understanding the job you're applying for. The best way to start doing this is by thoroughly going through the job description of that role. Job descriptions sometimes can be very generic, but usually have great information about the role. For Amazon job openings specifically, you may be able to even identify the most important leadership principles in the job description. It may not say dive deep or customer obsession, but it will provide important information that will match with the leadership principles. If you're able to, I would recommend reaching out to people who actually work on that role so that you can get a better understanding about the role and the org. Number 2, brainstorming. After getting a better understanding of the role, I start by thinking about the type and number of stories that I would need for the interview. I call this the brainstorming step. As I know that Amazon has 16 leadership principles, and I know that there will be at least 8 questions from 4 interviewers with 2 LPs each, I want to at least have about 8 great stories that match with the important leadership principles. As mentioned before, it's impossible to guess the exact leadership principle questions that you will be asked, as that is usually determined by the hiring manager and they don't share it ahead of the interview. For the LPs, I would check the job description thoroughly and also check out my other video where I surveyed over 100 plus Amazonians to get the most important LPs by org and by role. Next step is projects to stories. Now it is time to list the projects that you have been working on for the past couple of years. This can be either big projects or small projects. Once I have listed the projects that I have worked for, I think about the episodes within the project, because most of the time there are multiple stories that you can tell within a project, especially the big ones. I list these down in bullet points and think about what happened within the project. I think about the problems we faced, people that I work with, options we had, solutions I implemented, and also the results of it. Step 4, match your stories with LPs. Now by doing step 3, you will have a good amount of stories. I always tell people to have at least 6 to 8 different stories to tell during the interview. You'll need to understand what each of the leadership principles mean. To better understand the LPs, I would strongly recommend checking out my other videos that I created for each leadership principles. When doing this, you may notice that you can use some stories for multiple different leadership principles. This is because at the end of the day, all the stories have multiple LPs when it is told really well. Because of that, I usually name the stories and match them with the LPs by using a grid table. This is the cheat sheet that I use for interviews, and you can find the link to my grid in the description. Prepare for follow-up questions. Once you have all the stories in place, now it is time to think about follow-up questions that you may get for each question. I think this step is really essential and unique to an Amazon interview process. I usually go through each stories that I created and think about possible questions an interviewer may ask. This can be things like, what are the other options you thought about? How did you gather the data and insight? What would you do differently? And many more. It really made a big difference for me when I thought about a follow-up question and how to answer them versus when I have not. So I really recommend thinking about the follow-up questions and possible answers for them. The last step is prepare for questions. Please prepare for questions you may want to ask the interviewer. This may not be a deal breaker for the interview as a whole, but this shows learn and be curious side of you, and you do not want the interviewers want to think you don't have it. It doesn't have to be a complicated question, nor some super smart question. So think about what you want clarity on. This can be things like, how has your experience been with the role? How is the org culture? And many more. Now, my personal tips when preparing for Amazon interviews. 1. Leadership principles. Anything you answer would have to come back to leadership principles. So think about LPs whenever you're answering those questions. Number 2, data. Please use data whenever you can during the interview. Data is essential in Amazon, and that's how we make decisions here. Number 3, dive deep to job description. Again, job descriptions have a lot of good information, but people neglect diving deep into it. I recommend checking it out again and again. Cheat sheet. Please check in the description for the link, but having a cheat sheet really helped me to organize and help answer questions in a very structured way. Yeah, that was it for today. Thank you so much for watching the video. If this was helpful, please subscribe to my channel and also like this video. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in my next content.